My husband was on a work trip, but he exposed his affair in one text. "You're better than her, baby." I stayed calm. And ruined him. Welcome to her revenge. I want to share my new story with you. My husband was on a business trip when he accidentally revealed a message on his iPad, then quickly unsent it before I could read it all. But I saw enough a name. And I knew it wasn't meant for me. "Last night was incredible. She's nothing compared to you, baby. I miss you." I didn't cry. I didn't ask within hours. I uncovered an 8-month plan, designed to erase me from his life. I didn't call him to confront him. I called a lawyer. And when he comes home, that will be the day everything in his life begins to disappear. I'm genuinely grateful you stayed until this moment. Before you go, where are you watching from? City, country, time zone? Drop it below. I love seeing this community light up quick. This story weaves and fictional elements for educational and entertainment value. Names and details are coincidental. But what this story teaches you, that part is very much worth holding on to. The snow had been falling for 3 hours. By the time I finally gave up, pretending I could concentrate, it was the kind of snow Chicago does without apology. Dense sideways. The sort that erases the city block by block, until all that remained outside my 18th floor window was a pale formless blur. Where the skyline used to be, Lakeshore Drive had gone quiet. Even the wind had dropped to a low, steady pressure against the glass. The sound of it, less like weather and more like breathing. I was sitting on the sectional with my iPad, propped against a throw pillow, a half-drafted client email open on the screen. The cursor blinked at the end of an incomplete sentence. It had been blinking there for 11 minutes. I knew because I had watched it, told myself I would finish the paragraph by midnight, and then watched it some more. Biscuit was stretched out along my left thigh, warm and boneless, the way golden retrievers manage to be. His chin resting on my knee. He exhaled slowly every few minutes, a sound so steady it was almost a metronome. He was the most relaxed living thing in the apartment. And that night I was grateful for the company. The apartment itself was quiet, in the particular way it got when Reed was traveling. Not peaceful exactly, but still. Every surface was exactly where he preferred it. The slate grey walls he had chosen the week we signed the lease, insisting the color made the ceilings feel taller. The low angular furniture he had sourced from a showroom in the West Loop. All clean lines and deliberate restraint. The abstract canvas above the fireplace. Dark copper and ash. A piece he had described as architecturally necessary, when I had gently suggested I didn't love it. Even the lighting was his recessed precise, the kind that made the apartment look like a spread in a design magazine. At any hour of the day, I had contributed a fern near the window, and a set of linen throw pillows in a color. The tag called oat. Reed had called the pillows redundant. I kept them. The fern was the only thing in the room that had no opinion about the aesthetic. We had shared an Apple ID since the first year of our marriage. It made sense at the time. Family plan shared subscriptions easier to manage. The iPad on the coffee table was mine in practice, the one I used for recipes and reading, and the occasional work project, when I didn't want to haul my laptop out. Reed had his phone, his laptop, his separate rhythms. The iPad sat between us, like a small domestic fact neither of us had ever examined. He had been in Las Vegas since 6 that morning. A sales conference. The Henderson Group he'd mentioned once weeks ago. The kind of event that filled his calendar 3 or 4 times a year, and took him away for long weekends. Well, I stayed home with a client, inbox and a dog, who didn't understand why. The apartment smelled different. When Reed was gone, I remembered the way he had kissed me before he left. Quick practiced, one hand already on the handle of his carry-on. The smile he gave me at the door, that particular smile, the one that arrived exactly on cue, and landed just short of his eyes. And then the elevator doors had closed, and the apartment had settled into this specific quiet. And I had told myself that was fine. It was 11:47 p.m. when the iPad's screen lit up. The notification appeared the way they always do. A thin white banner across the top of the screen, expanding just long enough to be read. Reads a message preview. I saw it in my peripheral vision first, then looked directly at it. The way you look at something you expect to be ordinary. It was not ordinary. She's nothing compared to you, dear. I told her I'll submit the application next month. Miss you, Ivy. For seconds, maybe 5, the banner was gone. Before I had fully processed what I was reading. Replaced by a smaller grey line read unsent. A message clean and automated and entirely too late. I read it again, not on the screen. In my head, where it had already settled into something permanent. I read it a third time. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. Because I think people expect tears to be the first thing. The immediate reflexive proof of pain. There were no tears. What moved through me was something else entirely. A coldness that started at the tips of my fingers. And traveled slowly, methodically up through my wrists. My forearms into the center of my chest. Not grief, not yet. Something more like recognition. Reed had changed his personal phone password in June. I had noticed. Said nothing. Filed it away the way I filed away other things. I had decided not to examine. He had started locking the door to his home office. When he took calls, he had created a separate iCloud account for his phone. He had been in his way careful. But the iPad had never occurred to him. Why would it in his accounting of our marriage? I was the woman who used it to watch cooking videos. And download library books. I was someone he had long ago quietly categorized as too trusting, too settled, too thoroughly convinced of the version of our life he had built around us both. I was not a threat. I was not even a variable. He had forgotten that. The most dangerous thing about still water is that it sees everything. I set the iPad down on the cushion beside me. I did not reach for my phone. I did not type his name into a text box. I sat in the dark of the room. He had painted the color he wanted. And I looked out at the snow, falling over a city that had gone completely white. And I thought about that smile at the door this morning. The one that had arrived exactly on cue. Then I picked the iPad back up, opened Google, and typed slowly, deliberately, one letter at a time. Ivy Beckett, Chicago. The search results loaded in under 2 seconds. I was sitting on the floor by then, back against the front of the sectional, knees drawn up, the iPad balanced on my thighs. At some point, between putting it down and picking it back up, I had slid off the cushion without noticing. The way your body makes small adjustments, when your mind has gone somewhere else entirely. The only light in the room came from the screen. Biscuit had shifted behind me, his chin resting somewhere near my lower back, his breathing slow and even. The first result was Instagram. Ivy Beckett Interiors, Chicago, Illinois. The account was public. I tapped it. Her profile photo was tasteful, professionally composed. The kind of image that occupies the exact line between personal and curated. She was standing on what looked like a rooftop terrace. The Chicago skyline soft behind her. Golden. Our light doing everything it was supposed to do. Dark hair, a smile that was relaxed. In a way that suggested it came easily to her. 26 according to the bio. A year and a half younger than I had been when Reed and I got married. The bio read Chicago Interior Design March. A cake emoji, tiny, rendered in orange and yellow. Sat next to the date her. I registered it. The way you register something that doesn't yet know it's important. March filed it somewhere in the back of my mind. And kept scrolling. Her feed was the kind that takes effort to make look effortless. Design projects. Fabric swatches, renovation before and afters. The occasional personal photograph. Slipped between the professional content. Like a footnote. She had 4,000 followers. Her captions were short and confident. She tagged suppliers, architects. The occasional restaurant. She had been to the Langham. I stopped. The post was from September. A flat lay of a room service tray. A glass of champagne catching the light. The corner of a cream duvet. Captioned simply checked in. Checked out of the week. The location tag read the Langham, Chicago. I knew that hotel. I had suggested it once. 2 years ago for our anniversary. Reed had said it was a beautiful place. But probably not in the budget right now. We were putting money aside. Weren't we, for the kitchen renovation? for responsible things for the version of our life that required patience and practicality. I had said yes, of course you're right. We had gone to a perfectly nice bistro in Lincoln Park instead, and I had not mentioned the Langham again. The post was dated September. I opened our banking app and pulled up the joint credit card statement for September. I had looked at it once when it came in, the way I looked at all of them, a quick scan for anything obviously out of place. The kind of review that trusts what it's reviewing. There had been a charge $3,200 business entertainment. Reed had mentioned it before I could ask. A client dinner, he'd said. Someone important. Someone he'd been cultivating for months. The timing mattered. I had nodded the Langham Chicago September. I looked at the number on the statement again. And then at the photo on the screen. The champagne. The duvet, the practiced ease of someone who had been exactly where she wanted to be. And I felt the two things connect with a quiet, definitive click that had nothing to do with sound. This was not a client dinner. The recognition settled over me slowly, not as shock, but as a rearrangement. The way a room looks different when you understand how the furniture was placed. Not random, not accidental, but deliberate. I thought about every time Reed had dismissed a restaurant as too expensive, too fussy, too much. The way he had recalibrated those words so smoothly that I had absorbed them as shared values. We were practical people. We didn't need extravagance. We were saving for something real. He was not a man who didn't like luxury. He was a man who had decided I wasn't worth the cost of it. I thought about my last birthday March. Quiet, unremarkable. I had made a reservation at a restaurant on the river. The kind of place I'd wanted to go for years. Reed had come home from work that day, with the look he got when he was about to suggest something reasonable. And he had. Babe, we're trying to be smarter about spending. Can we just do something at home? I had cooked. He had eaten, complimented the meal in a brief distracted way, and gone to bed before 10. I had washed the dishes and told myself it was fine. That we were building something. That this was what marriage looked like from the inside. Not candlelight and champagne, but the quiet accumulation of shared life. I set the iPad down on the floor beside me, face up. Ivy Beckett's feed still glowing on the screen. The apartment was very still. Outside, the snow had not stopped. It pressed against the glass with the same patient, indifferent weight it had carried all night. And the city beyond it was white and formless, and entirely unbothered by any of this. I sat there for a moment that was longer than a moment. Then I looked up, down the hallway, past the kitchen, past the coat closet, and the framed architectural print Reed had mounted. At precise eye level was the door to his home office. It was closed the way it was always closed. In 6 years I had never gone in uninvited. I had knocked. I had waited. I had accepted the boundary as a reasonable one. The way I had accepted so many things. I stood up, I walked toward it. When I reached the door, and felt the cool metal of the handle beneath my palm, I did not hesitate the way I would have yesterday. The office smelled like him. That was the first thing I noticed. The particular combination of oak furniture, and the cologne he ordered twice a year, from a shop in the Gold Coast. The scent so embedded in the air, that it felt less like fragrance, and more like a presence. 6 years of marriage. And I had been in this room perhaps a dozen times. Always briefly. Always at his invitation. A question about a dinner reservation. A signature needed for a document. He handed me without explanation. I had never sat in his chair. I sat in it now. The desk was clean in a way that felt deliberate. Not the surface level tidiness of someone who had straightened up before leaving for a trip, but the organized blankness of someone who had made certain nothing could be read from what they left behind. There was a monitor pushed to one side, a charging cable coiled with careful symmetry, a legal pad with a top sheet removed. The wastebasket beneath the desk was empty. I checked on the wall to my left. 3 framed photographs. Reed shaking hands with a man in a grey suit at what looked like a conference reception. Reed at a podium mid-sentence. The kind of photo where the subject knows the camera is there. Reed and a group of colleagues at some kind of dinner. All of them holding wine glasses at the same practiced angle. In not one of them was I present. In not one of them was there any evidence that he went home to someone. The laptop was on the desk, closed, plugged in. I opened it. Reed had never enabled two-factor authentication on his work accounts. I knew this because he had once complained that the extra steps slowed him down. It was the kind of small arrogance that assumes the first wall is enough. The screen came to life and asked for a password. I typed what I had known for the first 4 years of our marriage, the combination he had used since before we met, the one he had given me casually one afternoon when he needed me to print something from his email. A string of letters and numbers I had never thought to question, and had filed in the back of my mind, the way you file things that seem incorrect. Password. I sat back in the chair. I was not panicked. I want to be precise about that. What I felt in that moment was not the frantic energy of someone losing ground. It was something more focused, more interior. A kind of quiet that comes not from calm, but from the decision to think rather than react. I knew Reed not in the way I had thought. I knew him a few hours ago. Before the message, before the Instagram profile, before the hotel receipt that matched the credit card charge to the day. I knew him in the architectural sense. The way you know the layout of a building you have lived in long enough to navigate in the dark. I knew how he organized things. I knew how he thought about passwords. Not random strings, but meaningful combinations, chosen for their personal significance, changed only when the meaning required updating. He had changed this one sometime after June. I thought about what I knew from June onward. Several weeks ago, I couldn't fix the exact date. I had been walking past this door, on my way to the kitchen. It was slightly ajar, which was unusual. Reed was on a call, his voice low, and even the professional register he used when he was managing something. I hadn't been listening deliberately. I was carrying a glass of water and thinking about something else entirely, but one sentence had come through the gap in the door with enough clarity to, yeah, I've switched everything over to the Aspen thing. You know the date. I had kept walking. At the time it had sounded like work, a project name, an internal system, something with a date attached to it. I had not stored it as significant. I had simply passed it and let it go. The way I let go of so many things in that apartment. Now sitting in his chair, I held the sentence up to the light and looked at it differently. Aspen, February of this year. Reed had come back from what he described as a long weekend with a group of friends from his college years, skiing in Aspen. He'd said the kind of trip that was long overdue. Didn't I think he deserved a break? I had thought yes. I had said yes. He had come home on a Sunday evening, with a particular kind of ease about him, loose and satisfied in a way I had not seen in months. And he had brought me flowers, red roses, a full dozen wrapped in paper, from a florist I didn't recognize. I had been moved by those flowers. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. I had looked at them and felt something warm and tentative. And I had maybe something is shifting. Maybe he's trying. I had cooked that evening a real dinner, the kind that takes 2 hours and uses the good dishes. Reed had eaten well, told me it was delicious and gone to bed before 10. I had washed the dishes and called it a good night. Guilt flowers. I understood that now. I looked at the password field on the screen and thought about March, the date in Ivy Beckett's bio, the small digital birthday announcement I had read, sitting on my kitchen floor less than 20 minutes ago. The date read, apparently, knew well enough to use it as a reference point. In a phone call. You know the date. I typed Aspen 031 for the screen unlocked. I sat without moving for a moment. That stretched in a direction I couldn't name. The desktop appeared. A clean grid of folders. A browser window minimized in the taskbar. A wallpaper. That was an aerial photograph of a mountain range I didn't recognize. There were no personal photographs, no image of us. No artifact of the life we had supposedly been building. His password was the name of the trip he had taken to be with her, combined with the date of her birth. He had not locked me out of his life with something random or arbitrary. He had locked me out with her with the specific Deliberate coordinates of whatever she was to him. Hiding in plain sight behind a word and a number. That meant nothing to me and everything to him. I opened Gmail. In the search bar I typed one word Ivy. I hit enter 247 results. The most recent email sat at the top of the list. Time stamped 11:34 p.m. the previous night. The subject line read our future. Are you sure about the timeline? Last night at 11:34 p.m. While Reed was in Las Vegas. While I was on the other side of that closed door. Sitting on a sectional. He had chosen under lights he had picked. Trying to finish a paragraph. I couldn't find the words for. I moved my hand to the trackpad and I clicked. 247 emails. And the most recent one had been sent 11 hours ago. I did not read them in order. I started at the top, the newest. The one with the subject line. Still sitting open on the screen. And I let it tell me what it needed to tell me. Before I decided what to do next. The email was part of a thread. The sender was listed as MWeb, an Associates Family Law and Asset Protection, Chicago, Illinois. The tone was professional, unhurried. The language of a man who handled the dismantling of marriages, the way other people handled quarterly reports. He was responding to a question Reed had asked 2 days prior about whether the February timeline was still realistic, given certain complications. Marcus Webb believed it was. He outlined 3 remaining steps before the filing could proceed. He used words like restructuring and transition period, and clean separation of interests, the kind of language that sounds administrative, until you understand what it is describing, at which point it sounds like something else entirely. I scrolled up through the thread. They had been corresponding since August. 14 months of emails organized into a single chain, with the subject line that had been there all along. Our future. Are you sure about the timeline? Our future. I found the attachment. At the bottom of the most recent message. A single file exit strategy XLSX. I opened it. The spreadsheet was neat. Of course it was neat. Red was meticulous about organization. In the way that people are meticulous. When the thing they are organizing matters to them. There were columns for dates, action items, responsible parties, and status markers. Green check marks next to the completed steps. The whole document had the clean, functional appearance of a project plan. For something entirely reasonable. It was 8 months long. June the 20th, 24. Open individual checking account. Begin incremental fund transfers from joint account. Status complete. August 2024. Retain Marcus Webb Esquire. Execute retainer agreement. Status complete. October 2024. Initiate property restructuring via Callaway Properties, LLC. Transfer primary residence title. Status in progress. November 2024. Update life insurance beneficiary designation. Coordinate with provider. Status complete. January 2025. Inform Sloan. Allow 2-week adjustment period. February 2025. File petition for dissolution of marriage. Cook County Circuit Court. I read the list twice. Then I sat back and looked at the ceiling of a room I had never been permitted to fully inhabit. And I did the arithmetic. June 2024. We had been at the restaurant on May. The one on the river with the private room. Reed had reserved. Without telling me. A surprise for our 5th anniversary. He had ordered champagne. He had given me a bracelet in a small velvet box. A delicate gold chain with a single understated charm. And he had 5 years. We're just getting started. I had believed him. I had worn that bracelet home and slept in it. Because I didn't want to take it off. He had started this spreadsheet within the week. I stood up. I needed water. I walked to the small credenza along the wall, where Reed kept a glass decanter. The decorative kind. That was more about appearance than function. And I poured from it without turning on the light. I filled the glass too full. And when I lifted it, the water ran over the rim, and across my fingers and down my wrist. I stood there, holding a glass that was too full, in a room, built entirely around someone else's preferences. And I felt the cold water on my hand. And I let it be cold. Then I set the glass down, dried my hand on my sleeve and went back to the desk. There was more to read deeper in the thread. In an email Reed had sent to Marcus in early October, there was a paragraph that stood apart from the rest. The earlier messages had maintained the careful, bilateral professionalism of attorney and client. This one had a different register. Looser, more direct. The way people write, when they have stopped performing, and started simply saying what they mean. She has no idea. Keep it that way. Her trust is our biggest advantage right now. I don't want anything to shift before we're ready to move. Her trust is our biggest advantage. I read it once, I did not read it again. Some sentences only need to happen to you once to become permanent. The thing that struck me, the thing I will remember about that moment for the rest of my life, was not the anger, though the anger was there. It was the clarity, the way everything I had spent 6 years softening, or explaining, or filing away as unimportant, suddenly rearranged itself into a single, coherent image. I had not been naive. I had been managed. There is a difference. And that night in that chair, in that room with its empty wastebasket, and its photographs of handshakes, I finally understood what the difference felt like. From the inside, I looked at the screen, in the left panel of the Gmail window. Among the starred items and labeled folders, there was a folder I had not noticed before. It had been created with the same deliberate tidiness as everything else in that office. The label read Financials. I clicked on it. 3 files, a PDF titled offshore_cb_statements.pdf. Below it, property_transfer_draft.pdf. And then the third one. I saw the name and went very still. Insurance. Beneficiary. Change. November 2024. PDF November 2024. The spreadsheet had said November update. Life insurance beneficiary designation. Status complete. I had been in the hospital in November. The coffee was too strong. I had made it on autopilot. Measured wrong, didn't correct it. Stood at the kitchen counter for 30 seconds, staring at nothing before carrying the mug back down the hallway. The apartment had taken on a different quality. By this hour, the kind of stillness that stops feeling like quiet and starts feeling like pressure. Biscuit had followed me to the kitchen and back. He was lying just outside the office door now, his head resting on his paws, watching me through the gap with the patient, undemanding attention that dogs offer, without knowing what it costs you to receive it. I sat back down at the desk. 3 files in the folder. I had gone still at the third one, but I did not open the third one yet, because the third one had a date in its name, and I already understood enough about that date to know I needed to approach it in the right order. I needed to understand the full shape of what Reed had built. Before I looked at the part of it that involved the hospital, I opened the first file, offshore CB statements, PDF loaded across 2 pages. The header read, Cayman Islands Bank and Trust Private Client Statement. The account was registered under Reed's name alone. The current balance as of November 2024 was $182,400. I looked at that number for a long moment. Then I scrolled to the transaction history. The transfers began in June 2024. The first one dated June, 2 weeks after our anniversary dinner. Each entry was categorized under one of 2. Portfolio rebalancing fee, or international diversification management fee. The amounts varied: $3,000 in June, $5,500 in July, $4,200 in August, $8,000 in September. Irregular enough to avoid pattern recognition, regular enough to accumulate. I counted the entries. 14 transfers over 6 months. I opened the banking app on my phone and pulled up our joint account history. The withdrawals were there. Every single one. Time-stamped and categorized identically. Sitting in plain view in a transaction history. I had looked at every month and understood the way you understand things. When someone you trust has already told you what they mean. I had seen the line items, I had read the labels. I had thought investment fees. Reed manages that side of things, it all makes sense. It had made sense because he had built it to make sense. I went back to the laptop and searched the email thread for attachments I hadn't opened. There were several receipts, draft documents, correspondence with Marcus Webb, and midway through the list, I found what I was looking for. The file was named Investment Authorization Form, signed PDF. I opened it. It was a 2-page document on what appeared to be financial services letterhead, the kind of form that looks official enough to read as routine. The language in the body was dense and technical. Authorization to rebalance and diversify portfolio holdings across domestic and international accounts, including but not limited to offshore instruments. Buried in the third paragraph, after 2 full sentences of financial terminology, was a clause that authorized the account holder's spouse to direct fund transfers on behalf of the household investment portfolio. At the bottom of the second page was my signature. May 15, 2024. I sat back. I remembered that day. Not with precision. It had not seemed like a day that required precision. Reed had come home with a folder thicker than usual, and had set it on the kitchen table during dinner, with the practiced casualness of someone who has rehearsed the gesture. He had said he was restructuring our investment accounts before the June tax deadline. Something about optimizing our bracket, minimizing liability, the kind of explanation that is technically coherent and practically designed to end the conversation. He had said he needed my signature on a couple of documents that night because his financial advisor needed them by the end of the week. I had asked if I should read them. He had laughed, not unkindly, just with the particular warmth of someone who finds the question slightly unnecessary. It's just paperwork, babe. Standard rebalancing stuff. You trust me, right? I had said yes. I had signed. He had collected the folder, and I had gone back to clearing the dinner table, and that had been the entirety of it. I set my phone down on the desk and pressed my palms flat against the surface. The wood was cool. I focused on the specific temperature of it, the grain beneath my fingers. He had used my signature against me, not a forgery, not something a handwriting analyst would ever need to examine. My actual signature, given freely on a document I had not read. In response to a question, I had answered with the word yes, because that was the word I had always given him, and because I had not yet understood that trust in a marriage can be an asset that someone else is spending. I thought about what the money represented, in the only terms that felt real to me in that moment, not as an abstract financial figure, but as time. As the years before, Reed's commission structure had grown into what it was now when I had been the one carrying more of the household overhead, and we had talked about being careful, building something solid, not spending beyond what we needed. I had not bought new clothes for 2 years. I had cut the gym membership. I had said no to the weekend trip to Nashville my college roommate had organized, because the flights felt irresponsible, given what we were trying to save. I had done all of those small, glamorous things, because I believed we were doing them together. $182,400. He had moved it across an international border and put it somewhere I had no legal access to, and he had done it using a document I signed at my own kitchen table. On a Tuesday evening after dinner, I picked up my phone and took photographs. The statement, the transaction history, the authorization form, the signature page. Methodical, sequential. The way you document something, when you have already decided that documentation is what the moment requires. Then, I close the PDF and move the cursor back to the folder. 2 files remaining. I opened Property Transfer Draft PDF. The document was a draft deed of transfer. The transferring party was listed as Reed Callaway and Sloan Merritt joint tenants. The receiving party Callaway Properties, LLC Incorporated in the state of Illinois. October 14, 2024. The first asset listed for transfer was the condominium at our address, floor 18 River North, the apartment I was sitting in. The apartment was still listed first. I had been staring at the property transfer document long enough that the words had stopped looking like words and started looking like something else. A blueprint maybe, or a demolition plan. Our address printed in clean legal font, followed by the unit number. followed by the phrase to be conveyed in fee. Simple to Callaway Properties LLC, an Illinois limited liability company. Fee simple, that was the term. It meant complete unconditional ownership. No shared title. No joint tenancy, no Sloan merit anywhere in the chain. Once that transfer was recorded with Cook County, I would have no legal claim to the place. I had lived for 3 years. The carpet I had chosen, the fern by the window. None of it. I photographed every page of the document. Then I closed it. The third file had been waiting. Since I first opened the folder, I had not forgotten it. I had simply needed the particular kind of steadiness that comes not from feeling nothing, but from deciding to keep moving, regardless of what you feel. I clicked on Insurance. Beneficiary change. November 2024 PDF. The document was a standard policy amendment form from the insurance provider. 2 pages, formatted the way insurance paperwork always is, dense and designed to look routine. The policy was in my name. The original beneficiary had been listed as Sloan, a merit, consistent with the standard spousal designation. The amended beneficiary, effective as of the date of signing, was listed as IVR Beckett. The date of signing was November the 9th, 2024. I looked at that date, and then without choosing to, I was back in November. The accident happened on the evening of November. On the inbound stretch of I-90 just past the Irving Park exit. The snow had started 2 hours earlier. Not the light, decorative kind, but the dense, fast accumulating kind that the city gets when the temperature drops faster than the forecast predicted. I was driving home from a client meeting, taking the route I always took, and the car ahead of me broke suddenly. I corrected the road, didn't let me. 2 broken ribs on the left side, separated shoulder on the right. The kind of injuries that aren't immediately visible, that require a CT scan and 3 hours in the air before anyone can tell you with certainty what has happened to your body. The car was drivable but damaged. I was not in any practical sense fine. Reed arrived at Northwestern Memorial at 11:00 p.m. He was wearing the grey wool coat he kept near the front door, the one he grabbed when he needed to look put together quickly. He signed the admission paperwork at the nurse's station, and came into the room and stood near the bed, with an expression I had read in the moment as controlled concern, the face of a man holding himself together for someone else's sake. He said, "I'll take care of everything. You just rest." Then he left. Not the hospital. I don't mean that. He left the room. I saw him through the window of my room, speaking to someone on his phone in the corridor, his posture loosening the moment he thought I wasn't watching. And I had told myself he was calling his mother or his office, or anyone who needed to know what had happened. By the morning of November, I had not seen him in 12 hours. He called at 11 a.m. 5 minutes, maybe 6. He said there was a contract issue, a vendor dispute that had escalated, something he had to manage personally. He was sorry, he would be back as soon as he could. He said, "I love you," before he hung up. I had said it back. I had meant it. He came back on November. He walked in around 2:00 p.m. carrying a paper bag of fruit. The pre-cut kind from a grocery store near the hospital. The kind you buy when you need to be. Holding something in a folder tucked under his arm. He asked how I was feeling. I told him my ribs still hurt when I breathed deeply. He said that was normal. It would improve, the body was resilient. Then he set the fruit on the tray table and opened the folder. He said, the insurance company required periodic policy reviews, standard compliance update, something that had come due and couldn't be delayed past the calendar year. He said, "Just need your signature here, here and here." He laid the papers on the bed beside me and held a pen above them in a way that made the next step obvious. I was on the 2nd day of a morphine adjusted pain protocol. I had slept perhaps 10 hours total across 2 nights. My shoulder was immobilized, and the act of signing 3 times with my right hand cost me something I couldn't afford. I signed. He said, "Thank you, babe. Feel better?" He kissed my forehead. He took the folder and he left. He did not come back until November. I spent 6 days after that in the hospital, and then at home, recovering alone. mostly getting myself to the bathroom and back, learning which movements cost the least. On the 14th I had taken a taxi home, because no one had come to get me. The driver had helped me with my bag, without being asked, and I had tipped him $40, because it was the kindest thing anyone had done for me. In a week when Reed came home on the 15th, he brought sushi from the place on Clark Street, and smiled, the way he smiled when he had done something right. I came back as fast as I could. I had put my arms around him carefully, because of the shoulder, and cried against his coat. I had believed those tears were relief. I came back to the present slowly. The insurance document was still on the screen. Ivy Beckett's name was still where Reed had put it. I went to the email folder and searched Cabo. 2 results. The second was a reservation confirmation from the resort at Pedregal, Cabo San Lucas. Check in November. Check out November. 2 guests. The confirmation had been forwarded to Ivy's email address, which appeared in the CC line. November 8. He had flown out the day after leaving the hospital. He had come back on the 19th. Marcus Webb would have required original signatures for the policy amendment. The kind of document that couldn't be executed remotely. The kind that needed a pen and a body present. And then he had flown back. Chicago to Cabo San Lucas is a 4.5-hour flight. He had done the math and decided it was worth it. I stood up from the desk. I walked through the darkened apartment, past the kitchen, past the painting, above the fireplace that I had never loved, and I opened the glass door to the balcony. The cold came in immediately. The particular unambiguous cold of Chicago in December. At 2:00 in the morning. The kind that gets into your lungs. Before you have time to prepare for it, I stood in it without moving. Below the street was empty and white. The lake was invisible in the darkness, but I could feel it out there. The way you can always feel it. That particular quality of cold air that has traveled across open water. I stood in that cold for a long time. I was not crying. I want to record that as a fact, not as something to be proud of, simply as what was true. There was nothing left in me at that moment that could produce tears. What I felt instead was a kind of absolute clarity, the way extreme cold sometimes clarifies, rather than numbs. A single clean, non-negotiable understanding. He would not keep any of it. Not the money, not the apartment, not the life he had built on top of mine, and then planned to walk away from. While I was still inside it, I went back inside. I picked up my phone from the desk, and I did not open Reed's contact. I scrolled to a name. I had not called this late in years, had not needed to because my life had not required it, until now it rang twice. The voice on the other end was sleep-blurred, but immediately present. The voice of someone who has learned, in her line of work, to arrive quickly when the call comes. Sloan, it's past 1:00 in the morning. Talk to me. I did not sleep. I sat in Reed's office until close to 3:00 am, finishing the coffee that had gone cold. Going through the email folder one more time, with the systematic attention of someone who has decided that thoroughness matters more than anything else. Right now I photographed everything I had not already photographed. I organized the images into a folder on my phone, labeled it with the date, and locked it behind a passcode Reed did not know. Then I went to the bedroom, lay down fully dressed on top of the covers, and watched the ceiling, until the light outside the windows began to change. At 7 I showered. At 8 I was in a cab heading south on Michigan Avenue. The city, gray and quiet in the aftermath of last night's snow. The streets scraped clean and the sidewalks still white. I had a thermos of coffee I wasn't drinking, and a phone with a locked folder. I had looked at 4 times already, to make sure it was still there. Dana Whitfield's office was on the 34th floor of the building at 233 South Wacker Drive. A tower that announced itself clearly against the skyline. The kind of address that communicated, without requiring any further explanation, that the person behind the door was serious about what they did. I had known Dana for 11 years. Since before she passed the bar. Since before I had married anyone. She was the kind of person who arrived before you needed her. and said the thing that needed to be said, without decorating it first. She was standing at her office window when I walked in, already holding a mug with both hands, looking out at the lake. She turned when she heard me, took one look at my face and set the mug down. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not say, "I'm so sorry," or tell me everything's going to be okay. She pulled a second mug from the credenza, filled it from a carafe on her desk, and set it in front of the chair across from her. She said, "Show me what you have." Dana Whitefield had been practicing family law and asset protection in Chicago for 7 years. She had handled 17 contested divorces in Cook County, 5 of which had involved offshore accounts or fraudulent asset transfers. She was 34 years old and had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have learned, through repetition, that most problems are more manageable than they initially appear, and that the ones that aren't are the ones worth fighting. I laid everything out on her desk. The photographs of the email thread with Marcus Webb, the exit strategy spreadsheet month by month, the offshore account statements, 14 transfers, $182,400 current balance, the investment authorization form with my signature, dated May, the property transfer draft naming Callaway Properties, LLC, the insurance beneficiary amendment IVR. Back at November, Dana looked at each item in sequence. She did not rush. Her expression was the professional kind, controlled reading, absorbing. But I watched it change by degrees as she moved through the documents. By the time she reached the insurance form, she had gone very still. She said, "Had you signed this while you were in the hospital on morphine?" I said yes. She set the paper down with the careful precision of someone placing something fragile on a surface, and looked at me directly. "Sloane." Her voice was measured, each word given its own weight. "This is not just infidelity. What you have here is financial fraud, coerced consent, and the deliberate dissipation of marital assets. I want to explain exactly what that means under Illinois law, because it matters." She leaned forward. "Illinois divides marital property under equitable distribution, not 50-50, but according to what's fair, given the full circumstances of the marriage. Contributions, duration, conduct. When one spouse deliberately conceals or transfers marital assets, especially after the marriage has functionally broken down, the court can award the other spouse 100% of those assets plus attorney's fees. Every dollar Red moved to that Cayman account, every transfer he made after June 2024, when he signed the retainer with Webb, is subject to full recovery." She tapped the authorization form. "This signature is also a signature obtained under conditions of impaired capacity, post-surgical medication, pain, diminished cognition, can be voided for lack of informed consent. That's the insurance beneficiary change, and potentially the investment authorization as well. Both can be unwound." I asked, "How quickly can you move tomorrow morning?" She said it without hesitation. "I'll file an emergency ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order against any further asset transfers. Ex parte means I can file without notifying Reed. The court doesn't require his presence when there's documented evidence of active dissipation. Cook County's emergency docket moves fast. When the paperwork is this clean, a judge can sign the freeze order within hours of filing." She pulled the Cayman statements back toward her and made a note in the margin. "Once the TRO is in place, Reed cannot move money from the joint account, cannot complete the property transfer to his LLC, and cannot make any further changes to the insurance policy. Everything stays exactly where it is until the court says otherwise." I said, "He comes back Friday morning." I know she allowed herself something close to a smile, tight and deliberate. "He thinks he's coming home to a wife who doesn't know anything. That is, as of this moment, the single greatest advantage we have. You will not contact him. You will not change anything about how you behave. When he calls, you answer. You sound like yourself. You let him believe that he is still the one holding all the cards." I asked, "When does he find out?" "Friday afternoon," she said. "When he walks into this office." She picked up the Cayman statements again. scanning the transaction history a second time, with the focused attention of someone running a second check. Her pen moved once stopped. She turned the page. Then she looked up. There are 2 transfers here that don't route to the Cayman account. She turned the statement toward me and pointed to 2 line items near the bottom. $4,000, $6,500. Both are annotated the same way, mom loan. She set the paper flat on the desk and looked at me steadily. Has Reed ever mentioned his mother needing to borrow money? Recently I had never heard Reed mention his mother needing to borrow money. Not once, not in 6 years. Lorraine Calloway was not a woman who borrowed. She lived in a 2-bedroom condo in Lincoln Square that Reed's father had paid off before he died, drove a car that was 7 years old, and maintained meticulously, and managed her finances with the quiet discipline of someone who had learned, during a difficult decade in her 40s, that self-sufficiency was the only kind of security that couldn't be taken away. She had told me that herself over dinner one Sunday, in the tone of a woman passing on hard-won wisdom. I had admired her for it. I told Dana he's never mentioned anything like that. Not once. Dana nodded slowly. In the way. That means the answer was the one she expected. She had called her investigator at 7 that morning, before I arrived, before the city had fully woken up, and by early afternoon, he had returned preliminary findings. The 2 transfers, $4,000 in July and $6,500 in September, had both cleared into the same account, a personal checking account held by Lorraine Marie Calloway, 64 Lincoln Square, Chicago. There was no outstanding loan between Reed and his mother. On record, no medical debt, no property issue, no documented financial need of any kind. That would explain why her son had sent her 2 irregular lump sums from a joint marital account in the same calendar year. He had been systematically moving money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The investigator had also pulled restaurant records. Dana set a printed page on the desk between us. Lorraine Calloway made a reservation at Speakeasy. On July the table was for 2. A second reservation, same restaurant, October. Also for 2. She paused. Ivy Beckett's Instagram shows a post from July, tagged at Spiaggia. The post has since been archived, but our investigator captured it before it went down. I looked at the paper. Spiaggia was a restaurant on Michigan Avenue that occupied the 13th floor of a building overlooking the lake. The kind of place that cost enough to feel private, where the service was discreet, and the tables were far enough apart to have a conversation that no one else could follow. I had walked past it 100 times. Reed had taken me there once for our 3rd anniversary, and I had loved it. And he had said, "We'll come back for special occasions," and we never had. His mother had eaten there twice with his mistress. I sat with that for a moment. In July, approximately 1 week after the first dinner at Spiaggia, Lorraine had called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I remembered the call clearly, not because its content had seemed significant at the time, but because of its texture, the warmth of it, the particular softness in her voice, the way she had asked about my work, and listened to the answer with what seemed like genuine interest. At the end of the call, before hanging up, she had said, "You know, Sloan, you are the best thing that ever happened to my son. I hope you know that." I had thanked her. I had meant it when I said it. Within 2 weeks of that phone call, Reed had started coming home later. The pattern was gradual enough to seem like work. Pressure, a quarter closer, product launch. The kind of professional demands that fill the calendar in waves. I had adjusted. I had eaten dinner alone more often, and told myself it was temporary. I had not pushed because Lorraine had said to me personally, with that particular warmth, that a good wife gives her husband room to breathe. A good wife always gives her husband space to breathe. Sweetheart. She had said it at a family dinner in the spring. I had filed it under generational wisdom. The kind of advice that sounds dated, but comes from a real place. I had tried to live by it. I had given Reed space and room, and the benefit of every doubt I had, because his mother had told me that was what love looked like, and I had believed her. I understood now what that sentence had actually been. It had been instructions. She knew, I said. The words came out quiet. And even without the anger I might have expected them to carry, she knew the whole time. She sat across from me at her kitchen table and told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to her son. Dana did not offer comfort. She picked up her pen and wrote something in the margin of the page, in front of her. When she spoke, her voice carried the flat precision of someone converting raw material into usable form. The transfers constitute additional dissipation of marital assets. We add them to the filing, combined with the Cayman account and the property transfer draft. This establishes a pattern of coordinated, premeditated financial misconduct. Not impulsive, not situational. This was planned across multiple parties, over an extended period of time. That matters to a judge. I looked out the window. The Chicago River ran below us, gray-green and slow in the winter light, its surface catching the last of the afternoon sun. In irregular patches, across the water, the buildings stood their ground, the way Chicago buildings always did, immovable, indifferent to weather, indifferent to the particular human dramas playing out behind their glass. I had loved this city for most of my adult life. I had built something here, or believed I had. I thought about every family dinner, every holiday, every phone call Lorraine had made to ask how I was, how my work was going, whether Reed and I had talked about taking a vacation. The performance of it, sustained, consistent, enacted over years, required a kind of deliberate effort that I found, in that moment, more exhausting to contemplate than anything else I had learned in the last 14 hours. She had never slipped. Not once, neither had he. Dana set her pen down and looked up from her notes. There's one more person I need to tell you about. Her voice shifted slightly, not softer but more deliberate. The register she used when she was about to say something that required space to land. Someone from Reed's office. Someone you've met before. Before I reveal the next layer of this, and trust me, it goes deeper than you think. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. It tells me you're still here. And honestly, that means everything to me. A gentle. Some elements of this story are fictional, shaped for educational and entertainment purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, this is a comfortable place to step away. No judgment at all. The company holiday party had been 14 months ago. A catered event. In a private room at a restaurant in the West Loop. The kind of evening that exists, primarily for the photographs, and secondarily for everything else. I had worn a navy dress, and spent most of the night at a high top near the bar, making conversation with people, whose names I knew from context, but had never fully memorized. Reed had moved through the room with the ease he always had in professional settings, relaxed, unhurried, the kind of person who made every conversation feel like it was the one he had been looking forward to all evening. Marcus Teller had found me near the end of the night, when the crowd had thinned and the music had dropped to something quieter. He was Reed's age, with an open, uncomplicated face, and the particular warmth of someone who had decided, early in life, that being well liked was worth the effort it required. He had asked about my work, with what seemed like genuine interest. He had refilled my glass without being asked. When Reed had come to collect me, at the end of the evening, Marcus had shaken my hand and said, "It's easy to see why Reed talks about you the way he does. I had thought this is the nicest one." I said his name before Dana said it. She looked at me with something close to acknowledgement. Yes, Marcus Teller. Dana's investigator had been thorough. The report she slid across the desk listed 9 separate occasions over the previous 12 months, during which Marcus had confirmed Reed's stated whereabouts to anyone who had asked. On one occasion, a brief conversation with me, when I had called Reed's cell, during what was supposed to be a client dinner in Miami, and gotten no answer. Marcus had called me back 20 minutes later to say Reed was in the middle of a presentation, and would phone me when he was done. Reed had called at 10 p.m. and explained the rest. I had thanked Marcus the next time I saw him. 9. Boston, Miami, Denver. a product summit in Atlanta, a vendor meeting in Minneapolis. Each entry in the report listed the stated reason. The actual location Reed's phone had pinged during those periods, and the corresponding hotel or restaurant bookings that had since been traced. Every one of them had been with Ivy. The November entry was at the bottom of the list. Stated reason: contract crisis, Boston office. Confirmed by Marcus Teller, phone November 8. The actual location according to phone carrier data the investigator had obtained, through Marcus's voluntary disclosure, was the Cabo San Lucas International Airport at 11:42 a.m. on November 8. Departure and O'Hare International at 9:17 p.m. on November 9. Return. The resort confirmation code was listed in a. I had been in the hospital on November 9. I set the report down on the desk, without finishing the last page. Dana said when our investigator presented him with the carrier data and the booking records, Marcus cooperated fully. 18 minutes. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't ask for time to think. I asked why did he do it in the first place. Dana's answer came without pause, in the tone of someone delivering a finding, rather than an opinion. Reed told him the marriage had been over for a long time, that you were difficult, emotionally withdrawn, that you had grown apart, and you both knew it, that he was simply waiting for the right moment to tell you. Marcus believed he was helping a friend through an exit from a marriage that had already ended. She looked at me steadily. He didn't know about the finances. He didn't know about the hospital. He thought he was covering for someone, navigating a complicated, personal situation, not participating in a coordinated deception. I said nothing for a moment. Outside the window the last light had left the sky. Over the river, the city had gone from gray to the amber dark of a Chicago winter evening. The buildings lit from within. The street traffic below slow and continuous. It had been almost 20 hours since I had sat on my living room floor, with an iPad, and read a message that was never meant for me. 20 hours and I had not slept, had not eaten anything I could remember, and had learned more about the architecture of my own marriage than I had known at any point while living inside it. Reed had built a story, not just a plan, not just the spreadsheet and the offshore account, and the shell company, a story, a version of Sloan Merritt, that he had written and distributed to the people around him, to Marcus, probably to Lorraine, possibly to others I hadn't found yet. A character study in which I was cold, withdrawn, the obstacle in the way of his happiness. A story designed to make the people who might have said, "Wait, what about?" or say instead, "Well, it sounds like it's been hard for him." He had redefined me to an audience I didn't know existed, in a language I had never been given the chance to answer. I had not been given that chance because I had not known the conversation was happening. There was something about that specific fact, not the money, not the hospital, not even Ivy's name, in the beneficiary field, that sat differently in my chest than the rest of it. The other things were violations of trust, and contract and law. This was something else. This was the quiet erasure of a person. While she was still in the room, Dana looked at the time. 36 hours, she said. Reed's flight lands Friday morning. The TRO should be signed by the court by end of day tomorrow, which means the asset freeze will be in place before he sets foot back in Chicago. She paused. "Is there anything you need from me before we continue?" I shook my head. She turned to her laptop, opened a new folder, and turned the screen slightly toward me. "Then let's talk about what Reed planned to do with your home, because the property transfer to his LLC is only part of it. What he built goes considerably further than a shell company." Dana had laid out an order, not because the order made it easier to absorb. It didn't, but because she was the kind of person who believed that clarity was its own form of respect, and that presenting information in the sequence it would need to be argued in court was the most useful thing she could do. For the person sitting across from her, the property transfer was the most visible piece. Callaway Properties Hull LLC had been incorporated in Illinois on October. I had seen the filing date in the draft transfer document, and was currently the named receiving party on a deed that Reed's attorney had prepared. but not yet recorded with Cook County. The recording was the step that would have made it permanent and public according to Dana's investigator. That filing had been scheduled for the week of January 13, 2 weeks before. Reed planned to tell me about the divorce. He had given himself a 2-week window between "this is mine now" and "by the way, our marriage is over." The investment accounts were the second layer. We held a joint brokerage account through a firm on La Salle Street, a portfolio we had built over 4 years, mostly index funds, some bonds, the kind of steady accumulation that doesn't feel significant month to month until you add it up. Reed had submitted a restructuring request to the firm in November, reclassifying the account as individually managed under his name alone. The request was pending review. It had not yet been approved because the firm required written consent from both account holders for reclassification, a procedural requirement that had, without Red knowing it, bought time. He had not anticipated that a form would save her. The life insurance was the third layer, the one I already knew about, the one with Ivy Beckett's name where mine used to be, the one signed on a hospital bed in November. While I was measuring morphine and doses, Dana folded it into the summary without dwelling on it, because she did not need to dwell on things that had already been established. She simply placed it in sequence, so that the full picture was visible, all at once. If we had been a week slower, she said, the property transfer would have recorded. The investment account restructuring would have cleared. Once he followed up with the firm. After the divorce filing, the insurance amendment was already complete. You would have walked out of this marriage, legally entitled to significantly less than what you put into it. On paper, a fraction of what actually exists. She closed the folder. The Tro motion goes in tomorrow morning. By the time Reed's flight lands Friday, every account is frozen. The property transfer is stayed, and the insurance amendment is under formal legal challenge. He will land in Chicago to find that every door he spent 8 months building has been locked. From the other side, I thanked her. I put on my coat. I took the elevator down 34 floors and walked out onto Wacker Drive into a cold that felt different from the cold of the night before, less like something to endure and more like something familiar, the ordinary winter air of a city I had lived in for most of my adult life. I took a cab north. The apartment was dark when I let myself in. Biscuit heard my key in the lock before the door was halfway open, and was already in the entryway by the time I got it, all the way, tail moving in wide unhurried arcs. The specific joy of a dog who has been waiting and is now done waiting. I crouched down and put both hands on either side of his face and let him be glad to see me for a moment, because it was the least complicated thing that had happened all day, and I needed that. I stood up and moved through the apartment slowly, not because I was looking for anything, but because I was looking at everything. The slate gray walls, the angular pendant lights, the abstract canvas with its copper and ash geometry, $4,000 of calculated coldness that had hung above that fireplace for 3 years, while I had adjusted to it, softened my own aesthetic preferences around it, told myself it was growing on me. It had never grown on me. I walked into the kitchen and stood at the counter. The canisters Reed had chosen, the coffee maker I had actually wanted, that he had switched out after 6 months for one he preferred, the small magnetic notepad on the refrigerator, where I had written grocery lists, in the same handwriting for 6 years. The paper worn soft at the edges from being torn off, and replaced. All of it was evidence now, not legally but in the way that everything becomes evidence once you understand what it was always illustrating. I sat down on the sectional, and Biscuit climbed up beside me without apology, turned twice, and settled his full weight against my left side. I rested my hand on his back. His breathing was slow and steady in the way it always was, the particular rhythm of an animal that does not carry its worries past the moment. I said, "It's just us for a while, buddy." He exhaled and pressed closer. My phone vibrated on the cushion beside me. Reed's name on the screen. A text message time-stamped 8:43 p.m. Landing at 9:00 on Friday morning. Really looking forward to seeing you. We should talk when I get back. I read it twice. He was in Las Vegas. In whatever hotel room he had booked. Under the Henderson Group conference rate. Composing a text to the wife. He believed was waiting at home. Without a single suspicion in her head. He had probably written it. With the particular focus of someone. Tying off the last loose end. The conversation he had scheduled in his spreadsheet. The one labeled in Form Sloan. Allow 2-week adjustment period. He thought he was still running the clock. I typed 3. I'll be here. I sent it. I set the phone face down on the cushion. And for the first time since 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday night, I felt something that was not cold and not hollow. Something small and sharp and in its way clarifying. I had never been good at waiting. But I had learned in the past, 20-something hours, that there was a difference between waiting and being ready. A few minutes later, I picked the phone back up and opened Dana's contact. She answered on the second ring. I said, there's something I need to ask you. About Ivy Beckett. What exactly do we know about her? Dana had the file ready when I arrived. She was already at her desk. When I came through the door at 8:30. A second coffee waiting on the side of the desk. Where I had been sitting for the past 2 days. The city behind her. The color of unpolished pewter through the floor to ceiling glass. The cold snap had deepened overnight. The kind of Chicago cold that stops being weather and starts being atmosphere. A pressure that settles over the entire city and reminds it with some regularity that the lake is not decorative. She did not say good morning. She turned a printed photograph face up on the desk and said, here is what we know about Ivy Beckett. The photograph had been taken at a charity event, a fundraiser gala. Judging by the formal attire and the ballroom setting, Ivy was in the left half of the frame, wearing a dark gown, standing beside a man in his late 50s, whose bearing carried the particular ease of someone who has never spent a significant amount of time worrying about money. He had silver-streaked hair, a custom-fitted jacket, and the precise posture of someone who had been photographed at events like this. For 30 years Theodore Beckett, Dana said, 61 years old, founder and managing partner of Beckett Development Group, commercial real estate primarily the Chicago metro area, mixed-use developments, riverfront property, is a portfolio in the 8-figure range. He has been building in this city for over 30 years. His name is on 3 buildings visible from this window. I looked at the photograph. Ivy is his only daughter, Dana continued. She works nominally in interior design. Her own client base small but legitimate. But her financial foundation is entirely her father's. She draws from a trust established in her name. Lives in a Streeterville apartment. Theodore holds in his company's portfolio. Drives a car registered to Beckett Development. She is not financially precarious, she never has been. I said, then why? Read. Dana set a second page on top of the first. Because of Connor Walsh. Connor Walsh was 29 years old. A project manager at a mid-sized construction firm. On the north side. He had been seeing Ivy Beckett for 14 months. Quietly, carefully. In the way that people conduct a relationship. They know someone powerful does not want them to have. He was not from money. He was not from a family. Theodore Beckett would have recognized as belonging to his world, according to the investigator's report. Theodore had become aware of Connor approximately 6 months ago and had made his position unambiguous. The relationship was not acceptable, and Ivy was expected to end it. Ivy had not ended it. She had instead continued seeing Connor, while simultaneously maintaining her relationship with Reed, using Reed's presence in her life as the version of herself she could present to her father, a man with a career, professional ambitions, connections in the development world, a man Theodore could look at and see, someone operating within an acceptable radius of his expectations. She was not in love with Reed, Dana said, but she needed him visible. I looked at the photograph again. Ivy's expression in it was composed Polish, the face of someone who had learned early how to perform the version of themselves that a room required. I understood that in my own way. She's pregnant, I said. It came out flatter than I intended. Not a question. More like a piece of information, being placed on a surface. To be examined. Dana nodded. Approximately 10 weeks. The father is Connor Walsh. Ivy has not told Reed this. She paused. She has told Reed the child is his. The room was quiet for a moment. She's using it to accelerate the timeline. I said yes. Reed's exit strategy had a January notification date. And a February filing. A pregnancy changes the pressure. It creates urgency. That Reed would have had difficulty explaining away. Or delaying, particularly if Ivy presented it as something requiring immediate action. Before the pregnancy became visible. In her social circles. I sat with that. There was a version of this story. The one I might have written 6 months ago before any of this. In which Ivy Beckett was simply the other woman. The younger one. The ambitious one. The one who had looked at someone else's husband. And decided he was available. That version was simpler. It assigned roles cleanly. And required very little additional thought. But I had been looking at Ivy Beckett's photograph. On a kitchen floor for 2 days now. And the version I was sitting with this morning. Was more complicated than that. She had been maneuvered by Reed's leverage. She was using a child who did not yet know it existed. As a bargaining chip. She had participated in something that had caused me genuine harm. None of those things cancelled each other out. Did Reed find the leverage on his own? I asked. Dana leaned back slightly. His work puts him in contact with property developers. Regularly high-end. Residential and commercial furnishing contracts. Often move through the same networks. As development deals. The investigator believes. Reed became aware of a land transaction. Theodore had structured through a subsidiary. An arrangement that had not been publicly disclosed and that, depending on the specifics, could attract regulatory scrutiny. If it surfaced at the wrong moment. Reed is not a lawyer. He may not fully understand what he has. But he understood enough to keep it. And to make sure Ivy understood he was keeping it. Yes, Dana folded her hands on the desk. Reed did not extort Theodore Beckett directly. What he did was more careful than that. He cultivated a relationship with Ivy. Made himself useful. And periodically reminded her. In the way that people remind others of things. Without saying them directly. That he remained in possession of information. Her father would not want circulated. It was not a transaction. It was a condition. Ivy stayed in the arrangement not because she wanted to. But because the alternative. Whatever Reed might do with that file. Was worse than the arrangement itself. I said so. Reed was using me to fund a performance. And using Ivy to build towards something else entirely. That is an accurate summary. I looked at the photograph one more time. Theodore Beckett's hand at his daughter's shoulder. Ivy's careful, composed expression. The ballroom behind them, everything in its place. She chose to use the pregnancy, I said. Whatever Reed did to her, she chose that. Yes, Dana said she did. And that choice is going to matter. I asked how. Because Reed doesn't know the child isn't his. Ivy knows. Connor Walsh presumably knows. And we know. She closed the folder. That piece of information at the right moment. Changes everything about Reed's position. His legal standing, his leverage over Ivy. His relationship with the Beckett family. She looked at me steadily. But before we get to that, I need to tell you. The real reason Reed can't let go of Ivy Beckett. It's not about the child. It's not only about the control. It's about $45 million. The third cup of coffee had gone cold. I had stopped tasting it an hour ago. And was holding the mug. The way you hold something. When you need your hands to be doing something. While your mind is somewhere else. Outside the window. The Chicago River walk was visible in the distance. A thin grey line where the river met the embankment. The pedestrian path empty in the cold. The water the color of old iron. I had walked that path dozens of times. I had not known until this moment. That it was the site of a $45 million project. That had been quietly shaping. The last 8 months of my life. Dana set the report open on the desk between us. The Riverwalk Commons development, she said. Mixed-use residential and commercial 7 floors. Wacker Corridor. Beckett Development Group. Filed the preliminary permits in the spring. Theodore has been in the market for an exclusive. Furnishing an interior fit-out partner for the residential units. High-end, the kind of contract that comes with a 5-year relationship, and the kind of visibility in Chicago's luxury property market that can redefine a company's positioning. The estimated contract value is $45 million over the build-out period. She turned the page. Reed has been pursuing that contract for 8 months. He identified the opportunity through his work in the luxury furnishing sector. His company has existing relationships with mid-tier developers, and River Walk Commons would represent a significant step up. The channel to Theodore Beckett was through Ivy. I set the mug down. Theodore Beckett is a man who does business with people. He knows, Dana continued. Not knows of knows. Meetings, dinners, shared events. He takes his time before committing to a partnership. And he assesses the whole person. Not just the professional record, social stability, personal reputation, the kind of life a man has built. Not just the company he keeps at work. In his world, those things are not separate. She looked at me directly. Reed understood this. He used his access to Ivy to engineer proximity to Theodore, dinners at the right restaurants, the right events, the right image. She paused, and the right financial appearance. A man of means. A man who spent freely on the things that signaled success. The resort bookings, the gifts, the car. All of it visible. All of it legible to someone like Theodore Beckett, who was watching consciously, or not, to see whether Reed Calloway was the kind of man his family did business with. The money, our money. I thought about the line items I had seen on those bank statements. The resort at Pedregal. The Tiffany receipts in the email chain with Ivy. The Mercedes purchase Dana had flagged in her notes. Numbers I had seen categorized as business expenses, as reasonable allocations, as the cost of doing business at Reed's level. I had accepted those explanations with the same quiet, thorough trust one had applied to everything else. He had been using our savings to audition for a role I had never been told existed. A good year for work, I said almost to myself. Dana looked at me. Every time he came home with that energy, I said. That particular kind of good mood. The one where he'd pour a drink without being asked. And stand at the kitchen window, looking out like he owned the skyline. I paused. I thought he was happy. I thought things were going well. And he was finally relaxing into it. I used to feel relieved on those evenings. I stopped. Those were the days he'd been with Theodore. Dana did not respond to that directly. She gave it a moment, then moved forward. Theodore Beckett has no knowledge of any of this. She said he does not know that. Reed has been using financial leverage against his daughter. He does not know about the asset fraud, the offshore account, the coerced signatures. He does not know that the man he has been considering as a business partner has been systematically dismantling his own wife's financial identity in order to appear unencumbered for a contract signing. From Theodore's perspective, Reed Calloway is a successful professional in a stable, personal transition. A man becoming available, not a man in the process of committing fraud. I said, and when he finds out, Theodore Beckett has spent 30 years building a reputation in this city. Dana said his name is on buildings. His business depends on trust, on lenders, on city officials, on a network of relationships. That takes decades to assemble, and can be damaged very quickly. He will not associate himself with a man who has defrauded his wife and coerced his daughter. He will not, she said, the last 2 words, with the flat certainty of someone who has spent 7 years watching what people with reputations to protect actually do when those reputations are at risk. The $45 million contract ends the moment Theodore understands what Reed actually is. How long does that take? 1 conversation, she said. 1 phone call. With the right documentation in front of him. A day at most. I looked at the window. 24 hours. Reed was landing tomorrow morning. And in 24 hours the entire structure he had built, the spreadsheet, the accounts, the company, the contract, the careful performance of a man on his way up, could be dismantled in a single afternoon. Not by me, not by Dana alone, but by the weight of its own contradictions, by the moment the people Reed had used and misled. finally understood what they had been part of. He had built something elaborate. And he had built it well. But he had built it on the assumption that no one was watching. Dana's phone vibrated against the desk. She glanced at it. The movement of her eyes was brief. But I had been sitting across from her for 2 days. And I had learned to read the small register shifts in her expression. The way you learn to read weather. Something had changed. She set the phone face down and looked at me with the particular stillness she used when information required a specific kind of delivery. Reed called Marcus Teller this morning. Her voice was even. Marcus did not answer, but Reed left a voicemail. Our investigator has been monitoring Marcus's phone log with his consent since yesterday. Marcus agreed to full cooperation as part of his voluntary disclosure. She paused. Reed's message was short. He asked Marcus to call him back immediately. He said something had come up, and he needed to confirm a few things. He knows something is off. He suspects it. He doesn't know what. But Reed is not a man who ignores a shift in the atmosphere around him. It's part of what made him effective at what he did. She straightened the papers in front of her. With a single precise motion, he's changed his flight. He booked a seat on an earlier departure this morning. It lands at a hair tonight. The window behind her showed the same pewter sky it had shown all morning. The river walk below was still empty. Still grey, still indifferent. Tonight, I said. 7:43 p.m. Dana stood and moved to her laptop. Which means we have approximately 9 hours. And the first thing we need to do is confirm. The TRO has cleared the court docket. Then we need to talk about what happens when he walks through the door. The cab dropped me in front of the building. At noon. I had left Dana's office with a list of 3 things to do before 7:43 p.m. Answer Reed's calls without changing my behavior. Stay off email threads that might leave a digital trail. And keep my phone charged. That was the entire instruction set. Dana had said it with the efficiency of someone who understood that over-preparation for an emotional confrontation was its own form of vulnerability, that the cleaner the directive, the less room there was for second-guessing. I rode the elevator up alone. The building felt the same as it always did, the particular neutral quality of a well-maintained, high-rise, temperature-controlled and carpeted, and indifferent to whatever its residents were carrying. When they stepped inside, I unlocked the apartment door, and Biscuit was there immediately, tail going, his whole back end involved in the greeting, the way it always was when I had been gone long enough to matter. I sat down on the floor of the entryway and let him climb half into my lap, which he was technically too large to do, and had never once let that stop him. I stayed there for a few minutes. The apartment was quiet and warm, and smelled like itself, and I needed a moment that belonged only to that, to the specific, uncomplicated reality of a dog who was glad I was home. Then I stood up, washed my hands and waited. The call came at 1:17 p.m. Reed's name on the screen. I stood at the kitchen counter, with the phone in my hand, and I took one breath, not for courage, more for calibration, and answered, "Hey." His voice was the conference trip voice, the one he used when he was managing multiple things at once, and needed each one to feel attended to. I pushed my flight up. "I'll be back tonight. Everything okay there?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Quiet, I've just been working." "Good." A brief pause, the listening kind, not the thinking kind. He was measuring something. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," I said. "It's been a long week." "Yeah." Another pause. "I know I'll be home tonight and we can. I want to talk when I get back about some things." "Of course," I said. "I'll be here." The words came out the same way they had in the text message 2 nights ago. Easy, unremarkable, carrying absolutely nothing that would give him what he was looking for. He said he would land around 8 and would take a car from the airport. He said he missed me. I said okay. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. After I hung up, I stood at the counter for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular. He had been probing. The questions were too evenly spaced, the pauses slightly too long, the conversational equivalent of running a hand along a wall in the dark, looking for a door. He had not found one. Whatever Marcus had told him or not told him, or implied by the particular way he had not answered, had been enough to send him home early, but not enough to tell him what he was walking into. Good, let him wonder. The second call came at 3:22 p.m. I was on the sofa with my laptop open, making a convincing effort at a client email. I had no intention of finishing. When the phone rang again, I set the laptop aside. I answered on the second ring. The difference in his voice was immediate and significant. The conference trip register was gone. What replaced it was something I recognized from the handful of serious conversations we had managed over the years. Far more deliberate. The tone of a man who had prepared what he intended to say and was now delivering it with the careful control of someone who could not afford to deviate from the script. Sloane, he said, I've been thinking a lot about us, about where we are. He paused. I think we've both known for a while that things have been off, that we've grown in different directions. I think on some level we've both felt that. I had read those words before. Not precisely, not verbatim, but in essence, in structure, in the rhythm of them. I had read them in a spreadsheet entry dated January 2025 in a column labeled Inform. Allow 2-week adjustment period. He was running the script 6 weeks early. His voice lower and softer than the written version had probably sounded in his head when he drafted it, but it was the same script, the same prepared architecture of sentences, designed to make a premeditated decision sound like an arrival. He was doing this now because Ivy had told him about the pregnancy. I did not know this with certainty, but I knew Reed's rhythms, and I knew the shape of his voice under pressure, and I knew that the call this morning had been about information gathering, and this one was about action. Something had happened between those two calls that had pushed him from, I need to know what she knows, to I need to move now. A pregnancy would do that. I waited until he had finished the sentence. He was building something about needing to be honest, about respecting each other, enough to have a real conversation. And then I said, you're right. We should talk in person when you're home. The quality of the silence on his end changed. The shift was small, a half-second of recalibration. But I heard it. He had expected something else. Resistance or confusion, or the particular quiet of a person caught off guard. He had not expected agreement. Yeah, he said, and his voice had loosened by several degrees. Yeah, I think that's the right call. I'm glad you all explain everything when I'm there. I'll be waiting, I said. I hung up and called Dana. She answered on the first ring. He's panicking, I said. He just ran the divorce speech on me. He's 6 weeks ahead of schedule. And Ivy told him about the pregnancy. I'm almost certain something changed between his first call and the second one. And it wasn't. Marcus, how did you respond? I agreed with him. Told him we'd talk when he got home. A brief silence that was not actually silence. The sound of Dana thinking. Good, she said. A panicked man who believes he still has control is the most manageable kind. The TRO was signed by the court 40 minutes ago. Every account is frozen as of 2:00 p.m. today. When he lands tonight, there is nothing left to move. She paused. Are you ready for tomorrow? Biscuit had migrated from the entryway to the far end of the sectional, curled into himself, one eye tracking me in the easy, undemanding way he had of keeping tabs on things. As I watched, the eye closed. I've been ready since Tuesday night, I said. I hung up. The apartment held its usual quality of stillness. Around me, the particular silence of a place where only one person is currently living, even if the furniture hasn't caught up to that fact. Yet I set the phone on the cushion beside me. It lit up 40 seconds later. Unknown number. A text message. I opened it. This is Ivy Beckett. I know this is strange, but I think we need to meet. There are things you should know. Things I should have said a long time ago. Please, I didn't know how she had my number. Reed's phone, most likely my contact, had been sitting in his address book for 6 years. I read it once. Then I read it again slower, with the same attention I had given to a notification banner on a Tuesday night that had started all of this. I set the phone down on the cushion. I did not respond. Not yet. Dana had 15 minutes to weigh in before I needed to leave. I called her from the bedroom, standing at the window, with biscuit pressing against my calf, and the afternoon light going flat and grey outside. I read her the message word for word. There was a brief silence on her end, the evaluating kind. Meet her, she said. But you go in empty-handed. Nothing about the TRO. Nothing about the accounts, nothing about what we have. You are a woman whose husband is having an affair, and who agreed to hear out the other party. That is all she gets. And if she tries to pressure me, let her. Dana's voice was steady. A person who is trying to pressure you will tell you exactly what they're afraid of. Listen to everything she says and remember all of it. Don't react. I told her I understood. I left the apartment at 4:15. The coffee shop on Armitage was the kind of place that had been in Lincoln Park long enough to become part of the neighborhood's texture. Mismatched chairs, fogged windows, the smell of espresso and old wood. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner, the one with a clear sight line to the door and a wall behind me. I ordered a black coffee I did not particularly want, and I sat with my hands around the mug and I waited. Ivy Beckett walked in at 4:32. The first thing I noticed was that she looked exactly like her photographs, which sounds obvious but is rarely true. Most people are either more or less than their curated images. Ivy was neither. Dark hair, careful posture, the composed expression of someone who had learned early that a room reads your face before it reads anything else. She was wearing a coat I recognized from a brand Reed had once pointed out as worth knowing. She spotted me immediately and crossed the room. Without hesitation, she sat down without removing her coat. That told me she was not planning to stay long. This was not a conversation she wanted to linger in. It was a transaction she needed to complete. I appreciate you coming, she said. I said nothing. I had decided on the walkover that I would let her drive the opening. Whatever she needed to say, she had come here to say it. The most useful thing I could do was give her the room to do it. While I paid attention to every word, she ordered a tea from the server, who appeared at her elbow, waited until he left, and then looked at me directly. I'm not going to pretend I'm here to apologize. Her voice was measured, not cold exactly but calibrated. The voice of someone who had thought carefully about how to begin, and was now executing that plan. I'm here because there's a situation developing that affects both of us, and I think it's better if we understand each other clearly before it gets worse. That's generous of you, I said. She registered the tone but did not react to it. She was, I noticed, quite good at not reacting. Reed and I have been together for 11 months. She said it the way you state a fact that has been established and does not require commentary. He told me your marriage had been over for years, that you both knew it, that the paperwork was a formality, that you had essentially separated in every way that mattered. I believed him. A brief pause. I'm not saying this to explain myself. I'm saying it as context for what comes next. And what comes next? She set both hands flat on the table. I told Reed 2 days ago that I'm pregnant. He believes the child is his. She held my gaze without flinching. That belief is useful to me right now, and I need the divorce to move forward quickly, before anything complicates that usefulness. There it was. She was not here to confess. She was not here to ask forgiveness, or to offer solidarity, or to perform any version of regret. She was here because she had a timeline, and I was the obstacle in it, and she had calculated that the most efficient way around an obstacle was to speak to it directly, and determine whether it could be moved. I said, and you think I can help you with that? I think we can help each other. She leaned forward slightly. You want out of this marriage. Reed wants out of this marriage. I need this to happen in a matter of weeks, not months. An uncontested filing moves through Cook County in 6 to 8 weeks. A contested one can take a year. Longer if it gets complicated. She looked at me levelly. It will get complicated if you make it complicated. The implication was not subtle. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting you consider what you actually want from this. Reed has resources. There's a settlement that makes sense for everyone. You walk away with something real, something clean. And you don't spend the next 18 months in depositions. An asset discovery. She tilted her head slightly. I know how these things go. You do not want this to drag out. I looked at her across the table. At the careful posture and the unremoved coat. And the hands. Still flat on the surface in front of her. She had miscalculated the room. She had come in expecting someone. Who did not know what she knew. Who had not spent 3 days. Inside her husband's email archive. Who had not sat across from a lawyer. While an emergency asset freeze was being processed. Through Cook County courts. She had come in expecting a woman. At the beginning of her grief. Not a woman who had already finished building the case. I did not correct her. I said you mentioned something developing. Something that affects both of us. The shift in her expression was small. But present a reassessment. Reed has been asking questions, she said. About the pregnancy. About timing. He's not certain the child is his. And he's been looking into what his options are. If it turns out it isn't. She picked up her tea, held it without drinking. He has a plan. Something he put together in the last 72 hours. It involves you. In what way? She reached into her bag and set a thin envelope on the table between us. He's going to use what happened in November, she said. Your accident. The hospital stay. The state you were in. There are people he's spoken. To professional people. About building a record. That suggests you are not in a stable condition. To make sound. Legal or financial decisions. Her voice remained even. Businesslike. The tone of someone delivering a competitive intelligence briefing. Rather than a warning. If he files before you do. And if that record exists. It changes what you're entitled to. It slows everything down on your side. And moves everything forward on his. She tapped the envelope once. That's what he has planned. I'm telling you. Because. A prolonged legal fight helps no one in this room. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Ivy Beckett. Who had come here not to help me. But to use the threat of Reed's next move as leverage. To get me to sign paperwork. Before I understood my own position. Who had handed me information as a weapon. Pointed at me not as a gift. Who was in her way. Exactly. As calculated as the man she had involved herself with. Just pointing the calculation in a different direction. I appreciate you telling me, I said. My voice was the same as it had been. For the entire conversation. Even unremarkable, giving nothing away. I picked up my coffee. I did not touch the envelope. Reed had checked into the Marriott on Michigan Avenue. At 9:30 the night before. I knew this because he had texted me the room number. Which was the kind of detail a man provides. When he wants to appear cooperative and available. While also communicating. That he has taken the initiative to remove himself. Gracefully, which he apparently believed. Demonstrated emotional maturity. I had read the message. Noted the information and gone to sleep. I had slept well. That surprised me a little. By 8 on Friday morning I had showered. Made coffee. And taken biscuit around the block in the cold. The sky low and white. The street quiet. In the way it gets after a week of snow. When the city has exhausted its commentary on the weather. And simply accepted it. Biscuit moved with his usual unhurried thoroughness. Investigating the base of every lamp post. With the focused dedication. Of someone who takes his work seriously. I waited. The cold was the kind that clarified rather than numbed. And I let it do its work. Back in the apartment. I sat at the kitchen counter with my second cup. And waited for what I knew was coming. Dana called at 10:03 a.m. Her voice had the particular quality. It carried when she had something specific to deliver. Not urgency exactly, but precision. The register of a person who has processed information. And is now transmitting it with maximum efficiency. Reed's attorney filed a letter with the court. This morning. She said it was submitted to the docket at 8:47. I have a copy. I set my mug down. What does it say? It claims that you are in a state of emotional instability. And that you have not been acting in good faith. In the dissolution proceedings. It is accompanied by a written assessment. From a private clinical psychologist. Stating that based on information provided to him. You exhibit signs of acute emotional dysregulation. That may impair your ability to participate. meaningfully in legal negotiations. A brief pause. This psychologist has never met you. He has never evaluated you. His report is based entirely on a description of you. Provided by Reed. I looked out the kitchen window. At the white sky over River North. How concerned should I be? Not at all legally. Dana's voice did not soften. It never softened when she was being precise, which was most of the time. I need you to understand exactly what this is, and what it is not. In Illinois, removing someone's legal capacity requires a formal petition for adjudication of disability. It requires an independent psychiatric evaluation ordered by the court, not chosen by the opposing party. It requires a full hearing, in which the subject has the right to legal representation, and the right to contest every finding. It requires clear and convincing evidence. She said each item the way you lay tools on a table, one at a time. A letter from a psychologist, who has never been in the same room as you, written based on the account of the husband, who is trying to take your assets, does not come close to meeting that standard. This document has no immediate legal effect. But I said, but it is designed to do two. First, to plant a seed, to introduce the idea of instability into the court record, before we appear before a judge, hoping something in the language sticks to the general impression of you. Second, to intimidate, to make you feel that your credibility is already under attack, and that the system may not take your side. She paused again. What it actually does in my experience is demonstrate to any competent judge exactly what kind of man filed it. A man who, when faced with documented financial fraud and a frozen offshore account, responds by hiring a psychologist to write a character assessment of a woman he has never examined. That is not a good look. I thought about that for a moment, and then quietly I laughed. It was not a warm laugh or a relieved one. It was the specific cold laugh of recognition. The sound of something finally making complete sense. He's done this my whole marriage, I said. Dana waited every time I noticed something. Every time I asked a question he didn't want to answer, or felt something he didn't want me to feel. I set my elbow on the counter and looked at the ceiling. You're overthinking it, Sloane. You're too sensitive. You make everything into something. You catastrophize. I said the phrases. The way you say something. You have memorized without meaning to. From repetition. He's been doing this for 6 years. Making me doubt what I saw. And now he's doing it in a letter to a court. The room was very quiet. Yes, Dana said. And now it's in writing. Which is worse for him than for you. I stood up from the stool. And walked the length of the kitchen and back. The way I did when I needed to think. With my body moving. The same tactic, I said. Same sentence, different audience exactly. And that pattern. The consistency of it is something we can use. A history of minimizing your perceptions is relevant to the question of coercion. It speaks to how the signatures were obtained. It speaks to why you didn't notice the transfers. It speaks to the entire structure of how this marriage operated. She let that sit for a second. He handed us something this morning. I don't think he realizes that yet. I walked down the hall to the bedroom. A mirror on the back of the closet door showed me someone I had been looking at my whole life, and had apparently been systematically taught to. A woman who overthought, who was too sensitive, who made things into something, who had spent 6 years adjusting her own internal thermostat to match someone else's. Reading of the room. She looked, this morning, like someone who was done doing that. Not polished. Not composed in the way I had sometimes performed. Composure, just upright and clear-eyed and in possession of considerably more information than the person who had filed that letter understood. Tell me what time, I said. 2:00. Dana said, I've already sent word to Reed's attorney that you'll be at the office, and that you're prepared to discuss the terms of dissolution. Reed will be there. Does he know what he's walking into? A brief silence. That was its own answer. He knows he's coming to a meeting with his wife. She said. That's all he knows. I ended the call. I stood in front of the mirror for another moment. Not performing anything. Not steeling myself for something cinematic. Just standing. In the particular clarity of a morning. When you know exactly what is about to happen. And you know that you are the one who made it possible. 6 days ago. I had been on a couch answering a client email. I couldn't finish watching a cursor blink. Waiting for a night to end. He had no idea what I was capable of. And honestly neither had I. I put on my coat. I arrived at 1:55. The receptionist on the 3rd floor recognized me. By now I had spent the better part of 4 days in this building, and directed me to the conference room. Without being asked. It was a different room from Dana's office. Larger, more formal. Designed for exactly this kind of occasion. A long rectangular table. 8 chairs, a whiteboard along one wall. And a mounted screen along the other. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the north side. Looking out over the river and the skyline beyond it. The same skyline I had looked at from a couch. 6 days ago, from a balcony at 2 a.m. from a kitchen counter. While waiting for calls. That I had already decided how to handle. It looked the same as it always did. Permanent, indifferent. Entirely unbothered. Dana was already in the room. Arranging documents in a sequence. Along the center of the table. With the focused attention of someone. Laying out an argument. One piece at a time. She looked up when I came in. Assessed something in my face. And returned to what she was doing. Your parents are connected, she said. I tested the call 10 minutes ago. I looked at the screen on the wall. Gerald and Carol Merritt were sitting in the living room of the house. In Evanston, where I had grown up. The one with the porch that faced the street. And the kitchen table where I had done every piece of homework I could remember doing. My mother had her hands folded in her lap. My father was sitting forward slightly. The way he sat when he was paying close attention. They looked at me through the camera. With the particular quiet of people who had been told what was in these documents, and had decided that the most useful thing they could do was be present and say nothing until it mattered. My father raised one hand briefly in acknowledgement. I sat down in the chair Dana had positioned, facing the door. The documents were arranged along the center of the table, in order of discovery, which was also the order of severity. The email thread with Marcus Webb. The exit strategy spreadsheet. The Cayman account statements. The investment authorization form with my signature. The property transfer draft. Naming Callaway Properties LLC. Insurance. Beneficiary amendment with Ivy Beckett's name. Where mine used to be. And the resort confirmation from Pedregal. Cabo San Lucas. November through 14th. 8 documents, 8 months of planning. Laid out in 11 inches of paper. Dana took the chair to my left. A small recording device sat on the table. In front of her position. Its indicator light dark for now. We waited at 2:03. The conference room door opened. Reed came in first. I had not seen him since the morning. He left for Las Vegas. The rushed kiss at the door. The carry-on, the smile that arrived on cue. That had been 4 days ago. And approximately a lifetime. He was wearing the charcoal wool suit he kept for important meetings, which told me he had thought about how this room would read him before he walked into it, which told me he still believed he was managing the situation. He looked at first glance exactly like himself, composed, forward moving, the version of Reed Callaway that walked into rooms, expecting them to organize around him. Then he saw the table. He stopped moving. Lorraine came in behind him. Reed's mother, 64 years old. The woman who had told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to her son, and nearly walked into his back. Reed had called her that morning. I learned this later. Telling her it was a family conversation, that he needed her there. She stepped around him, looked at the room, looked at the table, looked at the screen on the wall, showing my parents' living room in Evanston. The color left her face in a single visible wave. Sit down, I said. My voice was the same register it had been all week. Even unhurried. Giving nothing away that I hadn't decided to give. It was not a performance. It was simply the voice of a person who had run out of reasons to soften things. Dana reached forward and pressed the button on the recording device. The indicator light turned red. This is a formal mediation session, she said, addressing both of them. Without looking up from the documents she was aligning. Everything said in this room is being recorded, with notice given to all present. In accordance with Illinois law, you are both free to have legal counsel present read. If you'd like to call Marcus Webb, we can wait. Otherwise, we'll begin. Reed was looking at the table, not at me, not at Dana. Not at the screen where my father was watching him. From a distance of 22 miles. At the documents. At his own name. In the subject line of the email thread. At the top of the stack. At the spreadsheet. Whose column headers. He would have recognized immediately. What is this, he said. It was not quite a question. This is 4 days of work, Dana said simply. Would you like to sit down? Lorraine sat. Reed remained standing for another moment. The posture of a man performing the calculation of whether there was still a move available to him. And then he sat too. I began June 2024, I said. I picked up the spreadsheet and turned it so that the columns faced him. Across the table. You opened a separate checking account and began transferring money from our joint account. 2 weeks after our 5th anniversary dinner. I still have the bracelet. He said nothing. His jaw was set. August 2024. I set the email thread beside the spreadsheet. You retained Marcus Webb. The subject line of your first email to him was exit planning initial consultation. You used the word planning. October, the property transfer draft. Callaway Properties LLC. You incorporated it on the 14th. Our address is first on the transfer list. May, the authorization form. My signature. You handed me a pen at the kitchen table and told me it was investment paperwork. I signed because you told me to, and because I trusted you, and because I had spent 6 years operating on the assumption that trust between us ran in both directions. I placed each document on the table as I named it, not with drama, with the deliberate economy of someone who does not need drama, because the facts are doing the work. And November 9, the insurance amendment, then the resort confirmation, placed beside it so the dates were visible together. You came to the hospital. You told me the insurance needed updating. You handed me a pen while I was on a morphine protocol. And you waited while I signed. And then you flew back to Cabo San Lucas, where you had checked in the day before. The room was very quiet. Lorraine's hands were flat on the table. She was not looking at Reed. She was looking at the document in front of her. The bank statement, showing 2 transfers to her personal account. Annotated mom loan. And her expression had moved into something. Past composure. Past denial into the specific stillness of someone who has understood that the room already knows what they know. Sloane, Reed said. His voice had shifted. The professional register was gone, replaced by something lower, attempting intimacy. The tone he used when he wanted to relocate a conversation from the formal to the personal. Can we talk alone just for a few minutes? I can explain. No, the words sat in the room without decoration. On the screen. My father leaned forward another inch when he spoke. His voice was quiet enough that the room went still to hear it read. A pause, not for effect, but because Gerald Meredith was a man who believed that words required the proper space. Around them. I treated you like a son. I want you to look at what's on that table. Reed did not look at the table. He looked at his own hands. Dana reached beneath the table and lifted a laptop onto the surface. She opened it, turned the screen toward the center of the room, and looked at Reed with the expression of someone delivering the final document in a sequence that had been carefully ordered. This arrived at our office this morning, she said. I think it's the last thing you were expecting to see. Today the laptop screen faced Reed before he had time to compose himself. I had read the document at 8:47 that morning. Dana had sent it to my phone with a single line beneath. This arrived overnight. Don't react when he sees it. I had stood at my kitchen counter with cold coffee, going colder in my hand, and I had read the header without moving a muscle in my face. I had been practicing that stillness for 6 days. By Friday morning I had it down. Paternity exclusion report, Beckett IVR. Callaway read. Probability of paternity 0%. Reed read it. His eyes moved across the screen. The way eyes move when the brain refuses to accept what they're delivering. Slowly, then back to the beginning. Then forward again to the number at the bottom 0.00%. He read it a third time. He did not speak. Dana's voice came from across the table. Level and unhurried. Yesterday afternoon, Ivy Beckett voluntarily submitted to a certified paternity examination. She made the decision independently, without legal compulsion from this office. A pause, brief, deliberate. The child is not yours, Reed. What Dana did not say, what only she and I knew, was how that decision had come about. In Task 14, Ivy had come to Lincoln Park to pressure me into a fast, uncontested divorce. She had said nothing about Connor Walsh. She had said nothing about the child's true parentage. But Dana's investigator had already identified Connor Walsh. By Tuesday, on Thursday morning, Dana had placed a quiet call to Ivy's personal attorney. The message was simple. If Reed discovered the child's paternity on his own terms and timeline, he would have every incentive to drag the divorce proceedings into open-ended litigation. Ivy would lose control of when and how the information surfaced. A voluntary test, conducted on Ivy's own initiative, submitted to a neutral laboratory. That was the only move that let Ivy choose the moment of disclosure, rather than have it chosen for her. It was not conscience, it was calculation. I understood the distinction completely. Lorraine made a sound. Not a word, not a cry. Something smaller. A compression of breath that broke apart somewhere in the middle. The sound a person makes when something internal gives way quietly. Her hand pressed flat against the conference table. I watched her fingers go white at the tips. Reed turned to look at his mother. I had watched Reed Calloway for 6 years. I knew every version of the way he looked at people. The measured glance he gave subordinates. The warm performance he gave clients. The distracted half-attention he gave me. In the last 18 months of our marriage, I had never once seen him look at Lorraine the way he looked at her now. He was searching her face for something. The specific certainty she had always provided. The quiet confirmation that he was right. That the plan was sound, that the next step would hold. She did not give it to him. She was looking at the table. His phone lit up on the surface beside his left hand. Theodore Beckett. The room held its breath. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling glass. Chicago sat gray and indifferent. Under a low December sky. Dana said without looking up from her documents. I would answer that. Reed picked up the phone. His grip was unsteady enough that he set it back down on speaker, rather than risk dropping it. Theodore Beckett's voice filled the room. Not loud, not angry. Simply cold. In the way of a man who had already completed every step of his reasoning before placing the call. Mr. Calloway, I have been fully informed of the situation. This morning by my daughter, by Mrs. Merritt's legal counsel, and by our own team. Our partnership discussion is terminated. Effective immediately. Any documents you currently hold, pertaining to Beckett Development Group, will be addressed through the appropriate legal channels. Do not contact my family again. The line went dead. Reed did not move his hand from the phone. For several seconds, he stared at the darkened screen, the way a person stares at a door that has just been locked. From the other side, 8 months, every calculated expense, the resort bookings, the Tiffany bracelet, the Mercedes, every dinner, staged to project the image of a man worth $45 million had been aimed at this one contract. Theodore Beckett had withdrawn it in under 45 seconds. Reed looked at me. There was nothing left in his eyes that I recognized. The confidence was gone. The half-smile he used to carry into every room. Like a credential gone. What remained was something closer to the expression of a person who has just understood, for the first time, that the version of events they had constructed in their own mind was not the version that had been true all along. I did not look away. Gerald Merritt's voice came through the video screen. My father has never been a man who raises his voice. He does not need to. 6 years ago, he said you sat at our kitchen table in Evanston and told me you would take care of my daughter. I shook your hand. I believed you. He let that settle. I've seen everything that's on that table today. I want you to look at my daughter. And then I want you to sign those papers. Dana slid the divorce agreement across to Reed. 12 pages of black pen alongside. Reed did not read it. He picked up the pen and I watched his hand. The fine, barely visible tremor in his index finger and thumb. That only became apparent when he pressed the pen to the first signature line. Lorraine reached over and placed her hand on his forearm. Not to stop him. The reflex of a mother who has run out of other options. Reed looked at her, shook his head, one small, almost imperceptible movement. Then he signed. The pen came to rest on the table. A small sound. Plastic meeting wood. In the silence of the 34th floor I heard it clearly. Dana collected the documents with both hands. Her composure unchanged throughout. The asset freeze order remains fully in effect. The Cayman Islands account will be resolved through the marital asset settlement process. The property transfer to Callaway Properties LLC is void by court order. You have 30 days from today to remove your personal belongings from the apartment at 401 North Wabash Avenue. Reed stood. He straightened his jacket. A reflex so ingrained his hands did it before his mind could register the absurdity of the gesture. He picked up his phone. He walked to the door without looking at me again. Lorraine followed. She stopped for 1 second directly in front of me. Her lips moved. Nothing came out, not because she had nothing to say, but because there was no sentence large enough to span the distance between what she had done and what she wanted me to believe about her. She turned away. The conference room door closed with the ordinary sound of a latch catching. 3 of us remained. Dana at the table, my parents on the screen, and me. I looked out at Chicago. The skyline stood motionless in the gray winter light. The river below, reflecting the pale white of a December afternoon, that had no interest in the proceedings that had just concluded. On the 34th floor, somewhere down there, a $45 million project would be reassigned to a different firm. By the end of the week, my mother's voice came through the screen, low, almost private. Darling, I had not cried once in 6 days. Not at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday when the message appeared. Not when the password opened. Not in the hospital memory. Not on the balcony. Not in Lincoln Park. The tear that came now was one quiet. It moved down the left side of my face and I let it. Not for Reed, not for the marriage, not for any of it. For the specific, exhausted relief of not standing alone anymore. Dana placed her hand on my shoulder. Brief, certain, done. She gathered her files, closed the laptop and walked out. The door settled shut behind her. My parents stayed on the screen. No one spoke for a long time. Outside, Chicago continued cold gray. Enormous and entirely mine. 3 months. Chicago takes 3 months to walk out of winter. Sloan took exactly those 3 months to walk out of 6 years. Dana called on a Tuesday afternoon in late January. Not a dramatic morning. Just an ordinary Tuesday. With gray slush on the sidewalks. And Biscuit asleep by the radiator. And told me it was done. Cook County Circuit Court ruled under Illinois equitable distribution law. With full consideration of the documented dissipation of marital assets. The apartment at 401 North Wabash Avenue remained mine. Callaway Properties Yo LLC was voided by court order. The $182,400 from the Cayman Islands account was returned in full to the marital estate. My portion came back with the kind of precision that made Reed's 8 months of careful planning feel, in retrospect, almost embarrassingly miscalculated. The court ordered him to cover my legal fees entirely. The insurance policy was corrected. My name restored as beneficiary. The November amendment declared void on grounds of impaired consent. Dana told me the rest in pieces. Over the following weeks, the way you describe a storm that has already passed. Reed resigned from the firm before they could ask him to leave. The offshore account and the asset restructuring scheme had moved through enough channels by January that staying was no longer a viable option. I did not track what came after. It was not my responsibility. Theodore Beckett's legal team recovered the documents Reed had been holding through a civil subpoena process concluded before the new year. The leverage Reed had spent months cultivating dissolved the moment Theodore's attorneys got involved. He had miscalculated Theodore, the same way he had miscalculated me. He assumed that because someone had not yet acted, they were incapable of it. Ivy delivered her child in February. Connor Walsh was there. Dana mentioned it once, briefly at the end of a call about unrelated paperwork. I said nothing. What I felt when I thought about Ivy at all was closer to indifference than anything else. She had made her choices. So had I. I stopped thinking about her sometime in February, without noticing the exact moment it happened. The morning I opened the window was the first Saturday of March. There was no decision behind it. Biscuit had been staring at the window latch for 20 minutes with the focused patience of a dog who has identified a solvable problem and is waiting for someone with opposable thumbs to solve it. I got up and opened it. The air that came in was not warm. It was Chicago in early March. Cold that had stopped being brutal and started being merely present, carrying underneath it the smell of wet pavement and the particular sound of a city moving, a slightly different frequency than it had in December. Biscuit climbed onto the windowsill and sat with his ears raised, tracking sounds I could not identify. I stood beside him and looked out. I thought briefly about the woman who had sat on this couch on a Tuesday night 3 months ago, with a cold iPad in her hands and a work email she would never finish. The apartment had been dark. She had read a name she did not recognize, felt something cold move from her fingertips into her chest, and decided without tears, without any of the performances that moment might have licensed, to find out the truth. I was still that woman. I had not been replaced by someone stronger or more whole. I was simply the same woman, standing at an open window in March, in an apartment that a court had confirmed was hers. The pendant lights Reed had ordered were still hanging above the kitchen island. I was going to replace them. I had a catalogue open on the counter, with 3 options circled in my own pen. My decision at no cost to anyone. I put on my coat. It was a deep terracotta, a color Reed had once described as a bit much, in a tone that settled the matter without discussion. Standing in the morning light of a March Saturday, it was exactly right. I clipped Biscuit's leash. It was not a perfect ending. There would be mornings harder than this one. There would be a wall that needed repainting, and a couch I had not yet decided whether to keep, and days when 6 years of accumulated habit would reach for something no longer there. That was real, and I was not pretending otherwise. But whatever difficulty came next would be mine alone, not managed by someone who had decided, 8 months before I knew anything was wrong, that my trust was his greatest advantage. I stepped into the hallway. The elevator arrived. The lobby doors opened onto a Chicago morning that had not yet committed to spring, but was at least entertaining the possibility. I had never wanted revenge. I had wanted what was mine returned to me, accounted for, confirmed by a court that had looked at the evidence and reached the only conclusion it permitted. I had that now. Biscuit pulled slightly on the leash the way he always did, impatient, certain, uncomplicated in his enthusiasm for whatever came next. I followed him out into the city. Someone once asked me what I did the moment I found out everything. I sat still, I breathed, and I remembered something I had always believed. The truth will set you free. Not revenge, not anger, just truth. This story is my truth. Family betrayal doesn't begin with one dramatic act. It begins with small moments, a signed paper you didn't read, a question you talked yourself out of asking. Family betrayal is built slowly on borrowed trust. And family revenge, the real kind, it isn't destruction. It's rebuilding yourself legally, quietly, completely, until you no longer need the person who underestimated you. That is family revenge at its finest. Don't be like me. Don't wait for a midnight message to tell you what your instincts already knew. Trust yourself earlier. Ask harder, look closer. Family betrayal costs more the longer you ignore it. If this story reached you, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means everything. Upcoming stories contain fictional elements created purely for educational purposes. If that's not for you, no judgment. Choose what serves you best. Thanks for your time today. I'll see you again in the next story.